you're not feeling too jaded this far into conference. I'm sure the lively discussion will pep you up, hopefully. I don't think I actually need to tell people in the room about the importance of housing decarbonisation, not least because I'm reliably or perhaps unreliably told, because it was quite late in the bar when someone told me this, that this is the 20th housing decarbonisation fringe.
You are not serious.
Well, that's what I was told. So,
because number one was like super fringe. Yeah. Wow. It's like one person talking to himself. Wow.
So if this is
the best.
Yeah. Well, let's say if
the best one.
If this is your 20th, I commend you on your stamina. If it's your first, I commend you on your judgment, because this is definitely going to be the best fringe. But we know that around 19% of the UK's total emissions come from heating our buildings. We know that it's a huge challenge. And we also know that there is a huge gap at the moment between the government's rhetoric and delivery. At IPPR, as part of the, I should have introduced myself, I'm Luke Murphy. I'm head of the Environmental Justice Commission and lead the climate and environment work at IPPR. The Cross-Party Environmental Justice Commission has set out a plan for how we believe our housing stock should be decarbonised, and the Commission was really focused on not just how we reduce emissions and restore nature, but also how we tackle economic and social injustice at the same time. And it was great to hear those themes in Ed's speech on Sunday, and also of Rachel's on Monday as well. In terms of our plan, I'm just going to say very quickly, we've put forward the idea of the Green Go scheme, which should be a kind of cross-cutting government scheme that provides grants and loans, a one-stop shop of advice and support, an area by area, street by street approach, and we're hoping that policymakers will be keen to take that up. But enough from me. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I'm hoping we can have a lively debate with everyone in the room. First up, we've got Ed Miliband, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and also co-chaired the Environmental Justice Commission before taking up his current position. We'll be joined by James Murray, who is the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, who will be joining us in around 20 minutes. I'm delighted also to be joined by Kate Henderson, Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, who I actually work with on another housing commission, the Lines Commission, and Claire Tracey, who is the Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Nationwide. And I should say we're very grateful to Nationwide for their support of this event. But I'll hand over to Ed for opening remarks.
Well, listen, thanks so much, Luke, and it's great to be here. I think you all deserve congratulations for being still going, still at a fringe meeting. There's something about sort of Labour Party conference time, which is a day, I think, is the equivalent of about a week. So it sort of feels like we've all been here for about 4 weeks. So I think it's sort of, very impressive that we're all still going. I've been told to talk for 5 to 7 minutes. I have to leave at 6:15 for another event. I apologise, so I will keep it reasonably brief. Look, the first thing I just want to say is I want to do big congratulations to IPPR, to Luke in particular, but also the team at IPPR, to Caris, to Carsten, and everybody involved in the Environmental Justice Commission, because sometimes it's not exactly the line between the work done by think tanks and the work done by political parties can be kind of not as clear as it should be. And I just want to say that, when it came to Rachel's announcement yesterday, the work of IPPR, and I've said this to Luke and Caris, was incredibly influential in informing what we did, and it was an incredibly high quality piece of work, the Environmental Justice Commission. I was involved in it, but not. I then stopped being involved in it, so I'm not talking about my role. I'm talking about the work that Luke and others did, and in particular, I think what you did was you identified the sort of the gap question in terms of financing, which is the absolute key for me, and it does relate to this debate, to kind of unlock the climate transition that we need to make. So I just want to put on record my thanks to you and IPPR for the work that you did, and you deserve lots more funding from all your funders to say thank you and etc. And you need to do lots more of that work. And that's really the thing I wanted to say, which is, I think we sort of confront a puzzle, which is the government says that they're serious about climate. I think they aren't climate deniers. They do sort of believe that we need to tackle it. Even my opposite number, Kwasi Kwarteng, who's a free marketeer, recognises that there needs to be a role for government in this, but yet they are stuck and unable to move forward. So, for example, the heat and building strategy, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, has been postponed many, many times. It's been due to come out again and again, and it's been postponed. Now, the question is, what's the answer to this paradox? That they say they're serious about it. Is it just that they're not very good, or have other things on their mind? I think it's actually because they are struggling with the fairness issues that they face in relation to this, and there is a big change that we're talking about. Now, I think that the key issue here is that collectivizing this finance is the way you unlock these fairness issues. In other words, if people think that, you know, they're going to have to make the transition to a zero carbon world, and it's going to cost them lots of money, and it's not going to be fair, you're not going to succeed. But if you actually put government money behind it, it makes all of the choices significantly easier. I'm not saying that it makes it easy, but I think I think to take people with us, we owe them the fact that this isn't going to end up being a regressive or unfair transition. And that was the theme of what I was talking about on Sunday. And then I get to the question of retrofit. And it seems to me that of all the issues we face, and this is where I think the government's got a problem, because I think the Treasury is just resistant, unlike our Treasury team, Labour's Treasury team, this is the biggest no-brainer there is. I mean, emissions from buildings are higher now than they were in 2015. We have got one of the worst set of home insulation in the whole of Europe, the worst insulated homes. People pay for that in higher energy bills. It makes us more exposed as a country, as we see from the gas price crisis. It means carbon emissions are higher than they would otherwise be. And it's bad for jobs, because there's a huge jobs bonanza here if we do this. Now, believe it or not, I was on a platform with Andrea Leadsom the other day, and Andrea Leadsom and I don't agree on everything, he said diplomatically. But she was saying, this is a complete no-brainer. I don't know why the government isn't doing this. Why aren't we doing a big retrofit plan? So this is an idea whose time has come. We in Labour are very enthusiastic about this idea. We're going to be talking about it in the coming period as to how we think this can go forward. I think it needs to be a proper 10-year plan around retrofit, which I think could make a massive difference to people. I think I've got particular thoughts on the way this should be done. I think it's got to be a house by house, street by street program. There was this transition in the 1960s and 70s, I think, I'm not that old, I don't remember it, from town gas to natural gas, and it was less of a thing than what we're talking about here, but it was a house by house, street by street transition. And just to show you, I've been doing my homework for this event. I was looking back last night, because this is the kind of nerd I am, at a program that we had when I was the Energy Secretary called the CESP program. Who knows about the CESP program? CESP program. The gentleman knows about it. I mean, that deserves a round of applause. Come on, he knows about the CESP program, the Community Energy Saving Program. And it wasn't like the CERT program, which you'll also know about, which was a more general program. It was targeted on low-income families, and it was the closest we've got, I think I'm right in saying, to a house by house, street by street program. So it's going to be house by house, street by street. It should be led by our local authorities, I believe, and I think it's very significant to me that when I'm confronting Kwasi Kwarteng about the fiasco of the Green Homes Grant, which was a program the government introduced, an outsourced, privatised program, which was a complete disaster about a year or so ago. He says, well, yeah, didn't go very well, but the money we put into local authorities made a real difference, the Salix program. So it's got to be house by house, street by street. It should be local authority led. It's about retrofit. It's about insulation. It's also going to be about heat pumps. It's got to be about heat pumps and the kind of transition we make in terms of heating homes. Personally, I think we've got to be able to get to the point where we can make the offer to people that it's not, at least for lower and middle income people, and I think this is the demand of the coalition that works on these issues, that doesn't cost them kind of more than the current system. I mean, that's the aspiration one should have, because I don't think you want to have a system that's going to end up costing people more if you can possibly help it. That's my point about sort of collectivizing the cost. So I think this is an idea whose time has come. I think it's completely doable. I think with imagination and political will, it can be done. We want to do it. Last point I'll make is this, which is, I think it goes to a wider point about this, the whole climate transition, which is, what is the big yawning absence from what government is doing? It's the sense of a plan. It's the sense of a plan. And in 2009, I produced something called the Low Carbon Transition Plan, which was not at all perfect, but it was an attempt to say, how are we going to make this transition as a country? And if you want the private sector to invest, if you want households to know what's going to happen and families to know what's going to happen, you've got to lay out a plan for people. And then you've got to lay out an overarching plan, and then you've got to lay out a plan sector by sector, whether it's homes or transport or specific industries like steel or the automotive sector or offshore wind. And once you have that sense of a plan, I think we can do this. So I think it can be done. We've got to get on with it. I think the work of IPPR and others is going to inform what we do. And frankly, I think it's a sort of an opportunity. And that's what I will end on, which is it's an opportunity to create a better world for people. It's not just about avoiding the disaster of the climate emergency. It's about jobs for people. It's about warm homes. It's about ending fuel poverty. It's about all of those things. And I think we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ed. Since you're able to stay till 6:15, we'll go to other speakers and then to questions, if that's okay. Kate, over to you.
Great, thank you. I'll stand up too so I can see everybody in the back of the room, and creates a bit more energy as well, I think, being up. So I've been around long enough to remember that 2009 document, and actually the work that was done in those years with the formation of a department focused on energy and climate change. But not just that, from a housing perspective, we had things like the Code for Sustainable Homes, and we also had a huge amount of work into net zero by 2016. We are 5 years on from that. 5 years on from that, and we're still not building net zero homes. Now, we can do this. We absolutely can do this, but we need leadership. We need policy, we need planning, we need funding, and we need a collective, collaborative effort. Now, I run an organisation called the National Housing Federation. We represent housing associations, so not-for-profit social landlords who own and manage around 2.5 million homes in this country, providing housing to around 6 million people. And housing associations are absolutely committed to getting to net zero, and the role that Retrofit will play in that. And as Ed just said, there are huge benefits of doing this. This isn't just about energy. This isn't just about carbon dioxide emissions. It's not just about tackling climate change, although that is absolutely essential. It is also about quality of life. It's about affordability in your home, not just of your rent, but of being able to live comfortably and well on a lower income because your house is fit for purpose and it's future-proofed. And there are huge benefits of doing that. Now, as housing associations, we have pretty much every housing type there is, in pretty much every postcode. And that is a real opportunity of investing in place and of creating jobs, highly skilled and lower skilled jobs in this transition in every part of the country. This should be part of our regeneration agenda. This should be part of our place agenda. Not only do we have homes in pretty much every part of the country, and when I say social landlords, it isn't just housing associations, councils as well. Ed's point around it shouldn't just be the home, it should be the street. I think we have a unique opportunity as social landlords to think about place. So yes, the home, the block, the street, the neighbourhood, the town, the city. And actually that will enable us, looking at those different housing types, to work out the best solutions for those different housing types, but also to get the economies of scale to roll out the right technologies in those places. And I also think, as housing associations and as council housing as well, that the relationship between the social landlord and the resident isn't just transactional. Now, to do this change, it is going to be disruptive. I was recently in Leicester. I went to visit a tower block, concrete tower block, all social housing, 270 plus social homes there. And they are having their heating system, old storage heaters, ripped out, having a new heating system put in, will all go to electric, highly sustainable, but it's disruptive. It's taken 5 years. But the residents in that block support it. They are working towards it. There is so much work that's gone into resident engagement in terms of alleviating debt. So actually being able to understand your energy in real time on an app, having that kind of education for everybody, but particularly for people on lower incomes, so that they can manage their finances better. And this is going to reduce their fuel bills as well as reducing emissions. And there are so many other examples like that, but it isn't going to be easy, so we need to do it together. This isn't about doing things to residents. It's about working together on solutions that are going to improve their home and their community. Now, this isn't going to be easy. So one of the things that we've been doing is asking our members, what are your barriers to retrofit now? And we've surveyed them. Top thing that came out was finance, and that isn't really a surprise. There's lots of pressures on social landlords right now, not least the building safety agenda, which is absolutely our top priority and non-negotiable. But we also have pressing housing need to keep building. We need to invest in existing homes. So we need funding. We need policy. We need to know, 2050 is a laudable ambition, but my goodness, we need to get on with it. It's 2001. What are we doing? Sorry, 2001, 2021. But time is ticking on and we're not taking the action. Now, to make investment, to take action, we need to have a roadmap to 2050 and we need detailed policy to get there. We need to know which technologies we're investing in. We need to be able to be backing the things that we can train people up to have the supply chains, to have the skills base to do that. And that's why we need to have more certainty over the policy landscape. So we're doing a piece of work on that we'll be launching next month that sets out some of those pillars that we need in place. But what we'd really like to see is government and the Labour Party setting out some of those more detailed steps, working with us. We know we can't meet this challenge on our own. We need to work with organisations like Nationwide. We need investors both in terms of consumer investment but also investment into the sector as well. We need to work with local authority partners. We need to work with communities. We need to work with utility companies. And there's a big convening role for government. We also need state intervention in terms of funding too. I'm ambitious about this, with the right policy, with the right strategies, with the right funding, good technologies that work and supply chains, we absolutely can and must do this.
Thanks very much, Kate. Also like to welcome James Murray, who's just arrived as well. Claire, over to you.
Very good. I hope people don't mind if I stay sitting down. I'm a banker, not a professional speaker, so I'm sort of a bit more. If it's okay, I'll talk like this. So I'm Claire. I'm the Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer for Nationwide, and Nationwide is the UK's second largest mortgage lender. So why do we care about this stuff? We've got 1.5 million mortgages on our books. We've got 16 million members, and they all have houses and flats and homes that they need to retrofit. So, often in these meetings, I guess the answer is we're the money. That's why we care about this so much. It's also worth saying, Nationwide's not a bank. So we don't have corporate clients that have fossil fuels. We are super green as an institution. We don't invest in fossil fuels. What it does mean is that when we look to reduce our carbon emissions, we're already carbon neutral for scope 1 and 2, but when we look to reduce our carbon emissions, we have nowhere to go other than green homes. That is the entirety of our mortgage emissions, basically. So that's why it really matters to us. I think what we're talking about here, and I just want to say, I'm so impressed by the real positive energy and the concrete commitments that I've been hearing, about over the last couple of days. It's a major, major challenge, and we can't shy away from that. The UK has 29 million homes. The vast majority need retrofitting. It is a huge ask. Interestingly, we made £1 billion of lending, very, very low interest rates, so 75 basis points, the lowest rate we've ever done. We made that available last year for people to retrofit their homes. And we had almost no applicants because there's just no demand out there, and that's one of the huge things that we have to sort of face into. When we look at this, we want to extend lending to the people that are able to pay for this, but, There's very limited public awareness. I mean, people, the research we've done says that something like 60% of people don't even think about their house when they think about their carbon emissions. They're thinking about planes and cars and the amount of meat they eat and all of that kind of stuff. The technology is quite complicated. People can get their heads around solar panels and double glazing and loft insulation, like ground source, air source heat pumps. It's like, don't even start with how those are supposed to work and what you're supposed to do with them. The market is pretty broken in terms of a trusted person who will come into your home and will do a good job. And by the way, poor retrofitting, is really, really difficult. It introduces moisture, there's issues with damp, there are a whole load of reasons why it's actually not good to have it done poorly. The 62% of properties in the UK are EPC D or below. And the average cost of taking a home from D to A, according to the Bank of England, is somewhere in the region of £37,000 to £40,000. So, how many UK people have 40 grand kicking around in their current account that they're going to deploy on retrofitting their home? When, by the way, your bills, yes, they may go down, but they may also go up if you put in heat pumps and you're using more electricity. So, I think we all need to accept that what we're talking about here is a significant, multifaceted challenge. I just want to echo the sentiment that's been expressed here. The key thing that we need is below the fantastic headline, yes, let's get to net zero. There is a massive sort of marzipan layer of policy commitments, structure, plans, organisation, clarity, strategy that we need. And Nationwide's been working with a number of institutions. I see the Federation of Master Builders here, but also energy companies, academics, and we've kind of written to government and said, these are the 7 policy asks that we need. We need more public awareness. We need fair financing. We worry an awful lot. We're owned by our 16 million members. We worry a lot about our members. We worry about our members. 2/3 of the properties in the north of England are EPCC or below. And so, according to what the government's consulting at the moment, those properties could not be let out, for example, by a landlord unless they were retrofitted. That is a massive, massive amount of money that will have to be spent on retrofitting by people who may be able to afford it, but they may not be able to. Regulation needs to be improved. 2019, the government raised VAT on solar panels from 5% to 20%. We need to invest in skills and green jobs. There are just not the people out there with these skills to actually retrofit. The small builders will not be able to invest in bringing on apprentices unless they know they're going to have the demand out there, because a lot of our builders are not huge companies. We need better data. EPC data is flawed. We need green power for green homes that we've talked about. We should stop building homes that are not net zero. So a huge, huge challenge. Real clarity is what we need most of all. And there's just so much energy out there from people like us to really step into this space. But at the moment, it's hard. And we need a plan.
Thanks very much, Claire. So next up, we're coming to James Murray. So as well as being the Shadow Financial Secretary, he also used to be the Deputy Mayor for Housing in London, so knows lots about this issue. And then we'll dive straight into questions. As we know, Ed has to go at 6:15. So over to you, James.
Great, thank you. Am I breaking the chain by standing up now?
No, I was the only one that didn't.
Okay, good. Look, thanks very much for inviting me along here, Luke, and it's really great to join this panel, who I know many of here tonight. I won't speak for too long, because I think we want to get on to questions, and particularly to catch Ed before he goes into some questions. Not catch him out, I mean to catch him before he goes. But as Luke mentioned, before I became the MP for Ely North, I was working at City Hall for Sadiq Khan as Deputy Mayor for Housing. And, to put it as simply as I possibly can, in housing, when you're building new homes, okay, it's hard, but at least you can change your planning rules. At least you can put some requirements on new homes. When you're talking about old homes, and I know London better than anywhere else, but you think of the variety of different kinds of stock that you have across London, it's just really hard. It needs a real plan. As the last speaker just said, it needs a proper plan and it needs money to make sure it happens, because the number of problems that we would come up against at City Hall, and I know that people working on councils came up against, and I'm sure housing associations as well come up against them. In London, you have big blocks, you have Victorian homes, you have listed buildings, you have buildings which are very hard to insulate, you have ones which use solid wall insulation, cavity wall insulation. You can go on and on about all the different kind of things you need, but it's not beyond our wit to do it. We know how to do it. We just need, again, to echo the previous speaker, a plan, and I would say, particularly my new Shadow Treasury role, a bit of money to back it up as well. And what we've seen from the government, and forgive me if I'm repeating what others have said already tonight, but in their 10-point plan, there was only £4 billion of new funding. And I think everyone knows, even people who are not experts in the area, can feel that that's not going to be anywhere near the kind of investment you need to really make the green transition over the coming years. And with their Green Homes Grant, it was botched, and I looked at it as a punter. I looked at it online to see how would this work. Could we get it done in my home? And we couldn't even work it out. We couldn't even find out, who the suppliers were locally. And I think as someone who was really interested in it personally and keen to get on with it, it was that impenetrable. Then they're doing something wrong. And indeed, in them withdrawing it, I think they proved that they had approached that in the wrong way. So I'll just end on, I think, a bit of positive news from my immediate boss, Rachel Reeves' speech the other day, which I hope everyone listened to and enjoyed, and thought it was setting out a really powerful stall for what Rachel wants to do, and what we want to do as a party when we get into government, when the election, whenever that may come. And I think, for Rachel, what was so important alongside all of the stuff she set out was this core commitment to funding that transition, that green transition over the coming years. £28 billion a year, every year for the rest of this decade, to really show that we can't get there without that serious investment. And that's exactly what it is, an investment. It's an investment in our country in the future. Green industries, gigafactories for batteries, offshore wind, and of course, to bring it full circle, keeping homes warm and getting fuel bills down. So I think we've started to show as a party that we understand the scale of intervention you need. We understand this needs a significant investment. We know from all of our experiences it needs a plan. It's time for us to push the government to do it now and then get them out, and we can get in and do it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. So if you've got a question in particular for Ed, before he goes, do raise your hand. I'm just going to ask two questions myself. One is on, you mentioned finance, and I think there's clearly common agreement, and I think it accords with the work that IPPR has done around finance. But I think one of the other issues that's often raised is around disruption, and Kate mentioned it, and there's no getting away from the fact that it will cause some disruption, and those that are opposed to this agenda kind of talk about the idea of ripping out of gas boilers, and but also that's kind of raising a spectre of something that's kind of quite extreme. But it is true that energy efficiency and installing heat pumps can be disruptive. So I just wondered how much you thought that is a barrier. And then secondly, we've talked about the jobs. 300,000 jobs could be created across the country, lower fuel bills, warmer homes. There are so many benefits of this. Why do you think the government aren't doing it?
Well, let me answer both of those. Thanks, Luke, and thanks for everybody's contribution. I thought it was a really interesting set of remarks. Look, on the first, just to be clear about this, the climate change, and the experts will correct me where I go wrong here, the Climate Change Committee is saying in the 2030s you shouldn't replace gas boilers. They're not saying rip out gas boilers. I mean, they're simply not saying that. They're simply saying there should come a point in time when you don't replace gas boilers. So that's just for the sort of clarity. Secondly, I think that the other thing about this is that we're at the early stages of this technology becoming widespread and installed. And the truth about these technologies is that they improve over time. Their costs tend to fall significantly over time. I mean, goodness me, if you'd predicted 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the fall in the costs of solar and offshore wind and onshore wind, people would never have believed you. The fact that the least cost technology is onshore wind, nobody would ever have thought that was going to happen. So costs will come down. That doesn't mean to say there isn't an issue of disruption. I agree with that. But it feels to me like the sort of big question is the technology going to work? Is it going to cost? And how do you minimize the disruption? And I think you can take people with you on this journey. I mean, that's my sense from the work that's been done on climate assemblies and so on. It's just, so I think it is doable. Then, without sort of completely minimizing the issues. Then on why haven't they done it? Look, I think the Rubicon they haven't crossed is to think this needs to be government-led, not market-led. I mean, they sort of fundamentally think it's a market-led change with a bit of government thrown in for good measure. And I don't think it's just not gonna work. It's just not gonna happen. That's the truth about it. So I think the finance question and the treasury question is the big presenting question here.
Thanks very much, Ed. So in terms of questions, I've got a gentleman in the back with the cap, lady there in the black shirt. Did you have your hand up? Yeah. And the lady there. So.
Hi, you've already touched on this about the EPCs, but I don't know if you're aware, but the old standard assessment process for EPCs is actually fundamentally flawed. You did touch on that. So for private sector landlords at the moment, they're having to meet an E requirement, is that? And most private sector landlords, I'm a jobbing electrician, by the way, so I'm at the sharp end of this, are happy to comply with that, but the sort of advice they're getting from their EPC assessors are night store heaters, putting them in, and even gas boilers if gas is available. I'm from Cornwall, we're generally off-grid for gas, that's why this is an issue. But if gas is available, some of them have been actually advised to put gas in to get that E to an F. So I followed this up with the EPC guys. It's a computer says no situation for them. If you go a little bit higher to the EPC trade bodies, they refer you to the Department of Local Government, which seems to be in charge of the standard assessment process. I think it was written in 2008. It doesn't even cover heat pumps, apparently, and air source heat pumps to bring the EPC to a better. There's a question in here somewhere. Are you aware that the SAP needs sorting out?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the asks that we have is on data. So I completely agree with that. You know, our view is the EPC is flawed. You know, you have all this smart meter data that's around now, but it's only able to be accessed by specific energy companies. And so I think there is a big question about property data, energy data, and how we use it better. There are also some really interesting startups in the States and in the UK about like people who can find ways to create smart meters that then optimize. There's so much technology can do in this space, and we basically have a pretty archaic, you know, rating agency for properties that, as you say, you can end up with a home that emits more, but it has a better rating than someone else who's got a home that emits less and has not, so, you know, yeah. Completely agree. Completely agree with you.
Anything you want to?
No, I'm about the experts on these questions.
EPC geeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. So I work for Orbit, which is a member of the National Housing Federation, non-profit affordable housing provider. And, you know, I completely agree with sort of everything that's been said around funding and green skills. And I suppose my question is you know, as sort of an organisation which is really sort of committed to decarbonisation of social housing stock, what can the sector do to increase and embed green skills and sustainable practices in our supply chains?
Well, you could probably better answer this than us.
Well, I suppose what can we do to sort of, you know, work with government and sort of, you know,
I mean, look, the thing I feel about this, I'm sorry to keep saying the word plan, but, you know, once you make the financial commitment in this area that you're going to really do this house by house, street by street program, you can then answer the question, and I think lots of people do raise this, how are you going to get the skilled people to do the work? How many people are you going to need? And you know, I actually think that it's quite an interesting there's an interesting wider issue here, which is, which goes beyond retrofit, which is the country's facing this supply chain crisis, and the government, and we've seen a big change in the supply of labour for a whole range of reasons, and the government has not changed a jot of public policy as far as I can see. You need a proper plan which says, okay, sector by sector, and this is true in the green transition, what's the skills needs, how are you going to find the people, where are they going to come from, how are you going to get them the training, and all of that. And once you start to do that, this can really happen. I actually think it could really engage and energize people if you did this in the right way. But it only happens, I think, you know, I'm really struck reading, I think it was the Federation of Master Builders or somebody did a survey of their members who'd been part of the Green Homes Grant. And, you know, I read some of the verbatim accounts of what people came back to. That's the kind of nerd I am. And, you know, I mean, it's sort of horrifying. People are like, I never want to be involved in government again. It's just a nightmare. It's completely ruined my business. You know, I've been owed all this money. I haven't got the money. Oh, my God, the bureaucracy. You know, so you've got to have a proper plan. It's got to be deliverable. and then I think lots follows from that. But I think the sector, the private sector, the social housing sector, everybody's sort of waiting to say, where is this going to go? And I think a spending review that says we're going to do some money next year just doesn't cut it, basically.
Thanks very much. I'll take a group of 3 more questions. So I know you had one. The person at the back in the check shirt. Yeah, first. And then in the red lanyard just there.
Hi, I've been trying to organise an eco-home event locally just to give residents and contractors advice on how to do more retrofittings and what they can do. And obviously, as for all the reasons that have been outlined, although I've missed quite a bit of this, I've hit lots of brick walls. And one of them is talking to contractors, and a lot of them are only focusing on social housing and big company things because they just can't. It's too risky to get into helping individual homes, mainly because a lot of the grants just disappear, as has already been said. And there are 2 things that I'm just hoping that we can put more pressure on the government to introduce. And one is consistency, more consistency in the grants so that they keep going, because until that happens, contractors are just not going to take on the work. It's just too risky. And the other thing that seems to just not be happening is to remove VAT from retrofit, because it's making things so much more expensive. So can we put more pressure? Because these seem to be 2 reasonably easy things to achieve.
Thanks. And then to take the next 2, if that's okay.
Hello there. Hiya. Okay, so I've just made some notes. So I think just to follow on from what you were talking about before, Ed, about skills and the question that was raised over there, obviously a key sector to deliver the warm homes is the construction sector. But our young people don't want to go into construction. It's a really deregulated industry. Compare this to Northern Europe, where the trades are respected as a skill and there's a kind of path, and the trade is seen as a value. A young person may then choose to train as an architect or a surveyor, which is not the case in this country. So is it in development, or is it Labour Party policy to turn this around, to regulate the construction industry? Because anybody can say that they're a carpenter or a plasterer or a painter, and to improve and link national trade qualifications, because I really believe, being a carpenter, been involved in the training sector for many years, I believe this is crucial, really crucial, and it's very, very political, and we just don't hear about it enough.
Thanks very much. A really important question on construction and skills.
Okay, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but you can decide. So the trouble with sustainable homes and cars even is that once you've paid that initial cost, they actually is free to run, isn't it? So, you know, and then you just have to sort of maintain them and keep them going. So, so who's going to profit out of that? That's the question. And the people who were profiting out of it are not going to make their money anymore, are they? It was the people, the energy suppliers, the oil companies, blah, 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 blah. So that's where I feel that we got the crux, because they don't want to take their hand out of the power and to give it away to people so they can have free homes, free energy, free warmth, free travel, free everything, because that effectively is what sustainability is.
Thanks very much. Good question. Vested interests.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think these are excellent questions. I'm not sure my answers are going to be as good as the questions. On the sort of resistance that you found and people only being interested in social housing, look, I don't want to sort of repeat myself, but I think it goes back to the sense that, you know, if there is just not a sense among people that this thing is going to happen and there's a way of making it happen in their own homes, I mean, the market is not going to respond. I hear what you say on VAT on retrofit. James would not be happy if I sort of made a pledge to you. I'll let James he'd go and tell on me to Rachel Reeves. No, I'm joking. He will, but I mean, I think you make an eloquent point about the whole retrofit and VAT issue, and I think it is it is really important. I thought the point about construction is really interesting, about it being very deregulated. And when I was working on the 2010 manifesto, I did quite a lot of work with UCAT, the builders union, on this whole question. And I think there are real issues about the sector. And I think as part of a plan, it definitely needs to be looked at. And I think it goes to a wider question, which is, you know, and it goes back to my point about the supply chain. You know, we're gonna have to think sector by sector as a country about addressing issues of wages and conditions and terms. We've got to, at this moment, and I think in the post-Brexit landscape, this is the necessary time to do it, the right time to do it. We've got to think to ourselves, look, what kind of economy are we trying to build and what terms are we trying to build it on? And you can't build a successful economy on insecurity and weak terms and conditions. And I think and I think some of the points you make about construction are really well taken. Last thing I would say about the energy companies, it is definitely a paradox, or not paradox, a weakness of the current situation, that lots of the schemes are delivered by the companies who benefit from people using lots of energy. And that is a very odd part of the current landscape. It is not the way I would deliver a national retrofit program, as I've indicated. I think it should be done. I think local authorities should be in the driving seat. I think local authorities are up for doing this. I think it needs to be locally led and locally delivered and locally shaped, because I think partly for some of the reasons that we've heard about all the whole differences in the system that we face, difference in different homes and so on. But I think so I think that is definitely true, and I think that is, as I say, a massive weakness in the system. I mean, look, the last point I would make on this is I sort of feel kind of reinforced in this discussion that this is so the right thing to do. I mean, in a way, Luke's question, which is why is it not being done, is the right question. It's got to be done. It's got to be done in a way that gives people the certainty that there just hasn't been around this agenda. It's not to say that it's easy, but I think this is the point I would end on, is, you know, the gas price crisis, I think, highlights why this matters. I mean, it highlights very clearly, starkly, why this matters. If we acted on this, we would be less exposed to international gas supplies. People would have cheaper bills. There'd be lower carbon emissions. And you know, it would be job creating. I mean, that combination of things is a pretty unusual combination of things that you can tick all of those boxes with the right investment. And final point, you know, what have we done in the last 10 years? Cancelled zero carbon homes, built nearly 1 million homes at high carbon standards, which we will then have to retrofit, costing us far more than it would have cost in the first place to make them zero carbon. So it is a financial no-brainer, and we've got to do it. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much, Ed, for your time. Fantastic, and thanks very much to other speakers for waiting patiently. I've got a couple of questions for our speakers, but is there any others before I jump in? Yes. So I've got a person there in the black jumper.
Can I add one thing to one thing?
Yes, of course. Sorry, James.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to add, because I thought the construction workforce question was really interesting, and I just wanted to add something again from my previous life as Deputy Mayor at City Hall in London, which is that, you know, the construction industry faces a shortfall, which we know about and has been the case for years, exacerbated by obvious recent changes in the UK's position. And you know, there is a difficulty in terms of recruitment. And one thing that we were leading on at City Hall was trying to encourage a more diverse range of people to apply to be in the construction industry. And one really interesting way in which you could help do that is by modernising the construction industry through precision manufacturing, which is basically where you build components off-site, you build them in factories, and then you sort of assemble them on-site, basically, is how it works. And this would be a real kind of quite radical modernisation of the way that homes are built. It would save money. It would be you know, better quality homes, and it would be standardised components. So to give you one example of how ridiculous the system is now, if you're building like a small bathroom in a flat, there's no standard size of, you know, how big the bathroom that can be. It could be 1 metre, it could be 1.5 centimetre, it could be 1 metre and 1 centimetre. You know, it could be any kind of permutation of size. Whereas what modular construction or standardised construction methods say is, tell you what, why don't you say it's going to be 90, 95 or 100 centimetres for argument's sake. I'm not saying you have to, you know, there's not regulation of size bathrooms, but if you try and simplify them, then you have standardised components, and then you can build more at scale. and then you can construct them in factories, and it means that actually you can then have a wider range of people working in the factories rather than just on site, and it all starts to click together. And I think it's something which I got quite evangelical about when I was at City Hall. I think it's a really important part of the discussion. So sorry for abusing this privilege, but just jumped in there with that part of the discussion.
Not at all. Thanks very much, James. Yeah, just there, and then the gentleman at the back, and then the guy in the green T-shirt.
Hey, I'm Lucy, I'm from Inside Housing. I guess this question is mostly for James. This 28 billion a year that was announced by Rachel Reeves, has Labour done any work yet to figure out how much of that is going to have to be spent on the retrofit of housing? And then I guess for the other panellists, like any insight you have on how much you think should be spent on the retrofit of housing, that'd be great.
Thanks very much. We'll take the next two.
Hiya, I'm Andy Achilleos, I'm a councillor from Dagenham. Everybody's mentioned the finance issue, but nobody's really touched on the scale of the finance problem. You know, we've got, it's the centenary of the Becontree estate, the houses were built in the 1920s. They all need deep retrofitting. We own 18,000 of them. It costs £85,000 per property to deep retrofit it. Where on earth are we going to get that money from? But the other side is, even if we did have the money and it was all sunshine and rainbows, we couldn't deliver it at pace because there's just not the skills there. So the kind of two questions are, where's the money coming from to do this, even if we have got a plan? And two, do you think that COVID, the job losses potentially, have provided an opportunity to retrain a lot of people in the nation to get the skills that we need to retrofit at pace?
Thanks very much. Two really great questions there, particularly on finance.
Hi, thank you for this session. My name is Chris from Vauxhall. So a lot of people here have spoken about the challenges we are facing in terms of skills. And another challenge I can think of is materials because of the supply chain issues and shortages alongside cost inflation as well. So I'm quite keen to hear what the panelists think about this situation, on how it will pan out in the future and what we can potentially do to mitigate this situation as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I've got some individual questions I wouldn't mind asking to the panel. Firstly was to Claire, I wonder how much appetite you think there is amongst other lenders or just mortgage lenders in general to provide the kind of products, the kind of private products that might see finance incentivised. To Kate, I just wondered around the disruption issue, around whether there is concerns, the level of awareness, I guess, amongst your tenants or the tenants of your members, but also is there any concern, post-Grenfell about this kind of disruption and what this might mean for their homes? And then James, I think, you've been in the position where you've long campaigned for funding to build new homes, obviously have been in the role of deputy mayor, but I think it's fair to say a lot of housing campaigners think that quite often housing is the forgotten, or one of the forgotten areas when it comes to the Treasury and spending, and whether you would want able to give a perspective on why that is, because whether it's decarbonisation or affordable house building, the money being brought forward always seems to be short of what's needed. But I'll come to Claire first.
Thank you. So I think there have been a few kind of questions washing around the scale of the challenge financially, where's the money going to come from, and then, how much appetite there is from lenders in this. I mean, I think I'd start from the point of view of, you can't be market-led at the moment because there's so much uncertainty. So, nationwide, we're owned by our members, right? All we care about is doing the right thing for our members. How can I encourage members to go and add to their mortgage and retrofit when, for all I know, in 6 months' time, there could be a grant coming out and then they've missed out on £5,000, £10,000. The problem that we have at the moment is there's so much uncertainty that it's difficult for lenders to step into this market. Frankly, even if we had clarity that there was no money, at least we would know and then we could act accordingly. The problem is because we just don't know, it's really hard for industry to coalesce around and sort of fill the gap. And there will be a gap. There must be a gap, partly because of the scale of financing that's required, but also because there will be people that are able to pay. There'll be landlords that are able to pay. There'll be people that, have significant homes that have got the money. And there has to be a role for the private sector in that. So When you come to your question about, how much appetite is there amongst lenders to lend into this space, I think there is big appetite from lenders generally. I think there are maybe some other financial institutions, not nationwide, let's say, who might be a bit more distracted by the fact that they've got some big corporate clients that have got big fossil fuel challenges. So maybe everyone isn't as laser focused on green homes as we are. But, I think there is a real appetite to lend into this space. The problem at the moment is because we don't have the clarity of knowing what government is going to step up and do, we don't know how much of a gap we can fill. And I'm very worried about two things. I'm worried about, thing number one is that we might step in and try and create something, and then it will turn out that what we've created, our members will miss out because there'll be some new grant coming in that we didn't know about. And thing number two I'm really worried about is I'm worried about what happens in transition if we get poorly considered legislation coming in that makes it very challenging to own an energy and efficient property. I worry profoundly about those of our members who cannot afford to retrofit their homes and who could end up in a very sticky situation where their home becomes unmortgageable because it's not economic to retrofit it or they don't have the money. And I think there's a real risk of that if we're not careful.
Thanks very much. Kate.
So I agree with so much of that. I mean, in terms of the kind of the collection of questions around cost and around funding and what's come before, I think we've heard examples already of short-term funding and short-term programs where the plug is pulled quite quickly, creates fear and reduces confidence. And I think what we need is longer-term funding. At the moment, we have a social housing decarbonisation fund from government, and we've seen the first wave of that, but that's announced for a year. And actually, if you want to do a programme of change, we need to be thinking about funding over 10 years, actually over 30 years. But, if you had 10 years, which means announcing funding beyond a parliament. And that's tricky politically, but it's absolutely the right thing to do if we want to drive up economies of scale and to get the change that we need and to prove that technologies work and to get those supply chains. There was a question around kind of funding for deep retrofit, and I think, again, this is why there is a strong case for starting with the social housing sector of looking at those different housing types, because there will be different solutions to a Victorian terrace, to a 1930s semi, to a 1960s or 70s estate that might have been built quite quickly and cheaply post-war with the best of intentions, but actually is coming to the end of its built life. They are still people's homes and communities, though. So I think, in terms of this conversation and this debate around getting to net zero, it is really, really important. It isn't just seen through an economic lens, and it isn't just seen through a carbon lens. It's seen through a community lens and a justice lens. And actually, we do need consistency of approach still. So in the thinking that was done, 10, 15 years ago, all of that work that was done for the 2016 target that disappeared, but it was all around fabric first, then around technologies, and then what more can you do to get it to the best possible standard, and actually making some compromises, but overall getting to net zero. And that is the conversation we need to be back in. We can do this. It's completely within our gift to do this thinking and to make this work, but we're not doing it. From a social housing perspective, though, I think it is absolutely vitally important when it comes to those hard-to-treat homes that we have that debate rather than a debate around disposing of those homes. This agenda, tackling the climate crisis, must not exacerbate the housing crisis. We must not have a net loss of social homes as a result of that. And I think, again, this is within our gift to be able to do it, but we need to be able to frame that debate and to have a policy framework that enables us to do that. And then actually Luke's question is a really good one around disruption and around how residents feel about this. So when you go out and about and speak to residents around, and Playshapers have done some great work on this with TPAS, when you go out and about and you speak to residents about climate change, they are really passionate about their local environment. They are passionate about their homes. They want to do something. When you say to them, what about net zero? They say, what are you talking about? What does net zero mean? That, the language that we are using and government's using consumers have no idea what we're talking about a lot of the time. Actually, when you talk about, can you afford to heat your home at the moment? Is it warm enough? What are your fuel bills like? Is it comfortable to live here? Is it affordable to live here? They will tell you, no, actually, we're having to make some really tough choices. We heat one room. Or we're really scared of technology change because we're afraid of having less control of our heating bills if a different technology comes in. And actually, what we need to be able to do is to work with people and prove that technologies can work. And I think one of the things that is really incumbent upon all of us, but particularly politicians, is to move away from a narrative of taking action on climate change, of investing in retrofit as one of fear. This is going to cost you loads. It's basically a tax on your life. We're forcing you to do it. Rather than, this is going to, this is a long-term investment to make your home better. It's improving your asset if you're a homeowner. We're going to work out a way to do it that's manageable and affordable. And actually, this is a good thing for you and your family and your household and your quality of life. And subsidise it potentially, or incentivise it, that we can do this. But we've got to move away from the language of fear so that people become incredibly resistant to it. And with social tenants, there's less power as well. If you're a social renter or if you're a private renter, even less agency and power. Again, we need to make sure this isn't done to people. It's and I think, again, we absolutely can do this, and there's a really important role for social landlords in it, but for politicians, language is really, really important. So, policy is important, funding is important, but actually public confidence is something that I think our politicians and the media are really responsible for. And I do understand why we have all of the shocking stuff around climate change, because, my God, we need to get on with it. Like, what have we been doing for the last couple of decades? This is absolutely real. We're going to have tough conversations about places that are going to be flooded in this country, where actually, that some of this is absolutely irreversible. We'll be living with it. But this conversation about the change should be about hope rather than fear, and about the art of the possible, and about making things better, which we can do.
Thanks very much, Kate. And just to kind of agree with you vigorously, really, because you've actually repeated some of the common themes of the Environmental Justice Commission. So for those that don't know, we held 4 citizens' juries across the country, asking people what a fair transition looked like to them. And we held them in Aberdeenshire, Tees Valley and County Durham, Thurrock and the South Wales Valleys. And we developed a new social contract. We had an argument for a new approach to tackling the climate crisis and restoring nature. And 2 of the things were, you've just mentioned them, from mitigating a problem to seizing an opportunity, because everyone we spoke to recognised, yes, they recognised the scale of the challenge, but they were primarily motivated by the job opportunities, by their savings in fuel bills, the fact that they could get warmer homes, cleaner air. They were motivated more by the opportunity than they were, and inspired by it as well. And that's the kind of messaging that they wanted to hear, and I think that's what they want. I agree with you, they want to hear from their politicians and policymakers as well. And then one of the third points of that social contract was about the idea that it should be done with and by people rather than to them, because too often policy is done to people. So completely agree with you there as well. James.
Yeah, I'll just briefly mention, I think a couple of the questions touched on skills again, and I won't repeat what I said before about the construction sector, but just to kind of add to that, in that, I think people are well aware of the sort of wider issue we have with skills and investment in skills in this country, and that's well known. I do think there is also a specific issue or a specific challenge with the construction sector, with the workforce declining and the need to recruit new people. And I think, I'm in danger of repeating myself, but I do think the importance of selling construction as a great career, of making sure we're recruiting a more diverse workforce, going to places to recruit that we wouldn't have gone before. That's such an important part of making sure we have people who can actually participate in building the homes. And so I think, as part of the wider discussion about skills, the construction sector needs its own focus. To take the other 2 questions kind of together around the spend, I think if you stand back and look at it, as I kind of alluded to in my comments earlier, if you've got the 28 billion that Rachel Reeves mentioned in her speech, and kind of picking up Kate's point around the importance of it being long-term, that's 28 billion every year for the rest of the decade, so it's a long-term intention, it's a long-term commitment, and that's the kind of scale that we would need to truly focus on, not just keeping homes warm and keeping fuel bills down, but also investing in the factories for all the batteries we need for electrical vehicles, for the offshore wind, and for all the different kinds of investment we need. And then the question comes, which I think a few people have kind of touched on tonight is, why aren't the government doing it? You know, if it's because it seems very obvious in a way to all of us that's the kind of investment that's needed. Why is the government lacks ambition in this field so strongly? And I think the best way I can explain it is just talking about some of my experience of dealing with the Treasury when I was at City Hall. And I don't think I'm kind of telling tales out of school if I sort of say what some of the Treasury officials said there. But I'll give you an example. When we were discussing with them the investment we needed in housing, so that's both affordable housing grant and other investment, sort of investment in infrastructure or whatever else you needed. And there was a really strong feeling amongst Treasury officials. This is not to denigrate them, but it's just to show, I think, the mindset which was predominant there. That if you gave planning consents, that would build homes. The way to get more homes built was to give more planning consents. That was the kind of the orthodoxy within the Treasury. So they were talking about how can you, relax planning rules? How can you get planning permissions granted more quickly? How can you extend planning consents or so on? And we were just saying, but in London, there's, I can't remember the stat exactly now, but I think at the time it was like 200,000 homes in London had planning consent but weren't being built. So there isn't a lack of planning consents. There's a lack of the investment to get those homes built, or the infrastructure, or it's about the delivery of those homes. And I think that kind of shows on the Treasury officials' side quite a hands-off approach, quite a essentially leaving it up to the market to sort it out. And I knew with housing that the market will not sort it out when it comes to building the right sort of homes. And I think we know when it comes to sorting out the climate crisis, the market alone is not going to resolve it. So those two issues coincide in our discussion tonight, which is how do you sort out homes and their environmental impact. The market, again, is not going to resolve that on its own. And that's actually where I think you not just need I would obviously argue a new government, but also you need to make sure that the ministers who go into that new government, that the Treasury officials are given a steer in a new direction. Because I've found in all of my dealings with the Treasury and the various housing ministers, that orthodoxy, that kind of preference was so strong, and it's a real impediment, I think, to having a more active plan. And that word plan has come up many times tonight because I think when we're all thinking it through, we're like, we just need a plan. We need to implement the plan, and that's what's really missing.
Thanks very much, James. And I just wanted to respond on the costings. The Climate Change Committee has done estimates on the amount of spend that's needed to retrofit homes. IPPR was called previously through the Commission for an average of £7 billion a year to be spent on home decarbonisation. But the truth is actually, it would be tricky to get that much money out the door straight away. We've heard some of the issues tonight around kind of the skills availability and actually rolling out. And the other thing is, over time, it's also true that various private finance products will come on the market, green mortgages, which could also provide some of the funding as well. So you wouldn't necessarily need all of that public funding every year. It really would depend on the policy and the certainty that's provided by the plan. More or other questions? Gentleman here and the gentleman at the back.
Yes, I'm not a remoaner, but surely there must be lessons to be learned from our European and Scandinavian neighbours who've obviously got a bigger problem than us because they've got a more extreme winter. And I know in Germany, years ago, they'd started to retrofit teams of people who were specialists. Can anyone fill us in on what's happening?
Thanks very much. Gentleman at the back. Sorry.
Yeah, it was just a quick question on sort of financing and return on investment. That I think the average kind of return on investment, a lot of this retrofitting might be sort of 15, 20 years, but the average individual homeowner as a personal investment might have an average, I think, of something like 7 years. So I think, maybe a question to Nationwide, is there kind of more imaginative financing options where perhaps certain debts stay with houses or something like that, where it's not just sitting with the homeowner who might never actually see that return on their investment.
Thanks very much. And I was just going to add one question myself, which is it's related to Boris Johnson, and obviously he gave a speech which, you know, I think kind of set out very clearly the UK agenda on climate at a recent diplomatic summit. But one of the things he said, citing Kermit the Frog, at the time, whatever you think about the Prime Minister citing or talking about Kermit the Frog at an international climate diplomatic summit. But what the meaning of what he said was that it's easy to go green. And you know, certainly we heard through our citizens' juries that actually too often it's not easy enough to go green. So I just wondered, but it should be, but it's easy to talk about it, but actually we don't yet have those frameworks, we don't have the finance in place, and just whether you think it's yet easy enough for, you know, your consumers, your tenants, your residents, whether it's easy enough for people at the moment to make that the green choice, the easy choice, which is something that we heard over and over again in our juries. If there aren't any other questions after this, then I might ask you to also make some concluding comments in your response to this round of questions, and I will start with James.
Great, thanks, thanks, Luke. On the question about what can we learn from Scandinavia and Germany, I mean, I'm always keen to learn stuff from other countries, and I think in a lot of stuff around housing, I don't know Scandinavia as well, but I know Germany a bit, and a lot there. They've got stuff right in Germany. So I think we should be learning from other countries how they've done it. You know, I think that there is a particular issue with some of the housing stock in the UK because of its age and the fact that we haven't put the investment in. But as I say, it's not. We do know what the answers are. You know, I don't think it's a question of that we haven't yet, you know, invented or thought or come to the conclusion of what the answer might be. It's just some of it's quite hard, some of it costs a bit, right? But we do know what the answer is. I mean, the best example I can think of is, you know, in some of the homes, again, sorry for being London focused, but it's where I've been working, and you know, some of the homes where you can't put the cladding on the outside of the building because they're listed and stuff, you know, you have to put the solid wall insulation inside. That's quite disruptive because you have to move all the stuff out and it's kind of a pain, but it's worth doing because it really improves the house insulation, particularly those old buildings which are poorly thermally insulated. So we kind of know the answers. So whilst I think I agree we should learn from other countries, I think we do know the solutions. It's more about the kind of political commitment and drive to actually get it done. And then I guess on Luke's point, I think this is really important, what you say, Luke, about making it easy to go green and easy to take these decisions. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, even looking as a resident, looking at the Green Homes Grant, you know, I couldn't find a contractor, a builder in the area who would do it, and I was thinking, this is, you know, why is this so difficult? This is supposed to be a government scheme, and then obviously it fell over, and I'm like, right, well, yes, I can see why that happened. And I do think, you know, people understand the importance of a green transition. I think people do also understand, actually to Kate's point around it, or it's really important to make sure people understand what it means to you personally, rather than only talking about it in sort of abstract global or country-wide terms about net zero. Also explain to people this keeps your fuel bills down. You know, if you have better insulation, it means you save this much money on your fuel bills. It means your gas bills are lower and so on. I think that's a really important part of the communication. But I think the communication of whatever programs there are or investment options has to be clear. And just to sort of conclude, as we're doing concluding remarks, you know, we desperately need a plan in this country. We need it to be funded, and we need it to be implemented. To put this as simply as I possibly can, the government is failing on all those fronts. You know, there is not a plan, there is not the funding, and they are not getting on with it. And what we started to set out at this conference is that we understand the scale of what's needed. We have said the kind of funding we would put forward, and we believe we need to get on with it. And we will keep up the pressure on this government, and then we'll go out there and win the next election.
Thanks very much, James. Kate.
So on the question of examples from Europe and Scandinavia, there's loads. There is a lot of inspiration. I do think we can do it here too, and there's some fantastic examples here too. But some of the programs that have happened over the last decades, European-funded programmes have been phenomenal. So just a couple of examples. If you were to go to the Netherlands and see, this is new build, but see what they've done in terms of places like Almere, where the land has been reclaimed, you have self-build, you have community build, you have custom build, you have affordable housing built by housing associations there as well. That has happened because the land has been brought forward by the state and has been given consent by the state, and the value in that land uplift has been captured there, which has enabled a much higher percentage of affordable housing to be built, but also not just with custom self-build, but with parameters. So parameters of plot, but also parameters of sustainability. In Germany, there's loads and loads of different examples. One of the things they do in Germany is they have a very, very strong policy on renewables, and a lot of those renewables are community and cooperative owned. So it's a very different energy system there, and it means that there is much more local buy-in to renewable energy in a way that we are getting to it here, but we're behind. And actually, there's a lot more consent for renewables in Germany. But a specific example is Freiburg. Freiburg is absolutely amazing as a city, but because they plan ahead. Again, it's a really strong local authority role there, where they will say, okay, how is this town going to grow, or city? They will plan for it. They will then put in the infrastructure first. So they will put in public transport and cycleways and walkways, and then they will build homes, and they will build homes to really high sustainability standards. And I think there's lots of examples. Actually, an example of really good retrofit, if you were to go to Malmö in Sweden, you have the Western Harbour, again, state intervention, reclaimed land, lots of self-build, community build, really innovative projects. But you also have 1960s social housing estates that have been retrofitted. Now, they've been retrofitted not just in terms of CO2 emissions and climate, but because lots of antisocial behaviour, and they were being flooded. So the ground floor, where you had all of the community facilities in terms of laundry and that kind of thing being flooded. And what they did is they completely retrofitted it, green roofs, did a completely permeable park and garden. It is now a beautiful community area to play in, but also no flooding. And so you've alleviated the impacts of climate change and made that building much more sustainable for that community. And I think that's probably the point I'm going to end on, is that when we have this debate around sustainability, it is so vitally important about understanding what will be good for people who live in this place, and what does sustainability mean for them. And energy and climate, the carbon emissions and energy is a really important part of it, but livability, a nice place, a place that feels safe and healthy, a place that isn't too hot in the summer, that if shade, that your home's not getting flooded, you can afford to insure it because it's not getting flooded. And I think the heart of this agenda has got to be people. I will stop there.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned Malmo as well. I once dragged my long-suffering partner there while we were on an anniversary trip to look at the housing. I definitely recommend it as a place to.
But don't go on holiday with Luke.
Claire.
So to your question, the countries I know best are Italy and France, actually. I mean, the Italians have gone a very interesting way, which is they're just chucking money at it. So actually, the government will give you a grant for more than the value of your retrofit if you retrofit. So you actually make money from retrofitting. The French have got more of a mixed approach, but they have gone sort of quite regulatory. So if you want to sell a home in France, or you want to buy a home in France, or you want to rent a home in France, you just have to retrofit it to a certain standard, and that effectively creates the market. Now, that solution I'm not sure about for us, for the reasons that I talk about in terms of just transition and ability to pay, but I do think it's certainly an approach that we can look at. I think to the question at the back around innovative options and financial engineering, and can we do things, and new mortgages that move with the property, yeah, we're looking at all of that. I think there's a company in the US which is really interesting called Sealed. You might want to check them out. I mean, basically you can go to them, they will send out a project manager, they'll figure out the retrofit for you, that the company will then finance it, so organise it all for you, project manage it for you, finance it for you, and then, it's a 30-year loan which you pay back from energy savings, and if you sell the property, then you can either choose to redeem it or the mortgage goes with the property. So we're looking at some of this, but again, absent having any understanding of whether there will be any grants anytime soon for anyone, it's really difficult to figure out how to construct a product that's going to work for consumers. And we're very nervous about coming into the market with something really innovative when, for all we know, the people we flog it to could end up actually completely out of pocket, because if we'd waited 12 months, there would have been a 10 grand a year grant for those guys. And that makes it really hard. I think in terms of easy choices, I think, you know, there are so many things that we could do that would just be really straightforward. So we have a deal for our members whereby they just get money off if they switch to green energy, you know, and so it's a complete win-win, and we've had great take-up of that. There are some pieces that are really easy that do pay back, and so, you know, encouraging people to take those easy steps, you know, that people can understand. I do think this is an elephant that we can eat in bites, and starting with who can afford to pay and what are the easy things that do have a financial payback can start to help, and that's something that we feel really strongly about. What I'd finish on is, what was really interesting to me is, so Nationwide is actually, to start to put our money where our mouth is, we are in the process of building 239, you know, EPC A-rated homes in our hometown of Swindon. And they're all off gas, so, but because we want to learn and we want to use it as a blueprint. And when we put the order in for 239 heat pumps, it was the biggest order in the UK that had been done of that time. And I find that terrifying. 29 million homes in the UK, and the biggest, you know, to date sort of air source heat pump order is from Nationwide doing 239. We have to be retrofitting 2 homes a minute if we're going to get to net zero by 2050. So that's 180 homes while we've been talking. And that's the scale of what we've achieved so far. So we are so far away from where we need to be. And the level of acceleration we need is so important. And I completely agree with you, Kat. I think there is massive, massive energy and commitment there, but we need a plan.
Totally agree. I just wanted to add a couple of things. One is that there is IPPR research coming out on the 20th of October, which actually covers some of the international examples and sets out how and why some other countries are much further ahead. And please do go away and read the final report of the Environmental Justice Commission. Has lots on this, on how we live, how we decarbonise our homes, and how we travel as well. There's a 70,000 word version. If you've got some time, there's a 10,000 word summary and a shorter digital report. That's the short. That's the short. Yeah, I know. A 10,000 word summary is a bit of a misnomer. But but I actually, you know, I fundamentally agree, and I just, with what Kate said, or with much of what had been said on the panel, and I think, you know, the Commission sets out many of the barriers that have been talked about tonight, but actually the thing that we learned most of all from the citizens' juries we did is that if we put people at the heart of this process, if we don't just focus on reducing emissions, but also on how, you know, on allowing people to make the most of the opportunities that there are of the transition, the job creation, you know, reducing fuel poverty, then actually, as Claire said, there is a huge amount of latent support for this. People want to be able to make those decisions. They want to be able to make those green choices, but they're kind of being held back actually by government, and government can do a hell of a lot to put in place to make sure that it is the easy choice. And I think we'll be a long way away along the road to delivering if we do manage to do that. And I think the conference so far has been hugely positive in that regard, with Ed's speech on Sunday, Rachel's yesterday, and who knows what might be in Keir's speech tomorrow. But thanks very much to everyone for coming. Please give our panellists a round of applause. And enjoy the last night of conference.